Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. It doesn't take much backstory, but the basic facts are crucial to understanding what happened after the defining event. I'm Grant Oster. When I was in graduate school, getting my master's degree in chemistry, I met Laura. I fell in love right away. I think it took her 6 months, just before she got her master's degree in art history, before she fell in love with me. But it happened. Although I don't think any of us were particularly experienced, as far as I could tell, our life was excellent and she never voiced any complaints. We got married less than a year after she got her master's degree and got a job in the same city. She taught at a local college and I taught part-time at a public university. I also worked part-time at a research and consulting firm. After 3 years of marriage, I quit the university and worked full-time as a consultant. I became an explosives expert, and one of the clients I worked for was the federal government. Around the time our first daughter, Angela, was born, I was doing most of my work for the government, and it required quite a lot of travel. I know it was hard for Laura, but I did offer to quit and get a full-time teaching job at a local college that tried to hire me many times. However, Laura liked the money my job brought and the lifestyle it allowed us to live. She encouraged me to stick to it. I can survive. I am self-sufficient, was her smiling mantra. My travels had not weakened too much by the time our second daughter, Grace, was born, 2 years after Angela was born. I again offered to change my profession, but Laura again insisted that I continue to work as a consultant, since now we had an extra mouth to feed, clothe, and train. When the girls were 5 and 7 years old, my schedule changed for a while, and with my help in childcare, as well as after the girls went to school, Laura decided to return to work. She got an administrative job at a local university, mainly doing liberal arts college. For reasons that I never really understood, but which didn't bother me because it made her happy, Laura developed a keen interest in photography. We have more than a dozen albums dedicated to our life with children. Another, at first glance, strange interest that Laura showed at that time was in other languages, and primarily Italian. Now there were times when Laura traveled for her work, especially to Chicago, where she had meetings with philanthropists, visiting professors, and the Art Institute, as well as visits to Gina, her college friend who was an exchange student from Italy at the time, but now worked in Chicago. When the children were 8 and 10 years old, terrorist activities around the world made my skills extremely valuable to the federal government, and I was hired to work for them full-time for 2 years. I discussed this with Laura for many hours before agreeing to the appointment, because it would have led to a lot more trips during those 2 years, or maybe longer, and sometimes I would have been away for more than a month at a time. Laura cheered me up by saying that she and the girls would miss me, but everything would be fine. Because of my work in the federal government, I was absent for 2 Christmases in a row, when Grace was 9 and 10 and Angela was 11 and 12, which was heartbreaking. Laura took the girls with her to visit Gina in Chicago. I talked to them on the phone every day during their week-long visit, and they seemed happy enough. Obviously, Gina's relatives were visiting. The girls had met some of them before, and some were children about the age of our daughters. Finally, shortly before Thanksgiving, after more than 2 years of working on assignment, providing my expertise to fight terrorists, I returned to consulting full-time and rarely traveled. Laura continued to travel from time to time, usually about once a month for 2 or 3 days, mostly to Chicago, and I was happy to take on all parental responsibilities for Grace and Angela when she was away, although sometimes they went with her. I think it should be expected that girls become closer to their mother than to their father. Although I had a good relationship with Grace and Angela, they never really shared important things with me, and they rarely asked my opinion about personal matters, although it seemed that they always shared personal information with Laura. It didn't really bother me much, except for one thing. They were never, for anything, as talkative as they usually were, talking about their experiences when they went to Chicago with their mother. Although they were not introverted about this, they never shared information voluntarily and often laughingly changed the subject. Shortly before 18-year-old Grace enrolled in an out-of-state college, while Angela was in her freshman year at another out-of-state college at the time, Laura had a dark period. When I found her crying several times, I asked her what happened. She put it down to being lonely. She said she needed to go shopping with the girls in Chicago. Don't they have shops in Columbus? The trip was planned in a hurry and apparently required several long phone conversations with Gina in Italian. Since I didn't understand Italian, I just accepted what Laura told me about the details. I had no reason to doubt her, although she had never been so tearful before, as she was 3 or 4 days before she and the girls went to Chicago. Laura returned from Chicago 3 days later more optimistic, although still not quite normal. However, this was not surprising. The few purchases the three of them returned with from their shopping trip were amazing. When I asked about this, I was told that some items would be shipped later, including some directly to girls' college addresses. I really noticed that my life, which was never bad, except, of course, when I was away for a long time, because I never cheated on Laura, got better as soon as Grace left for school. I attributed this to the fact that Laura and I became closer as people with an empty nest, and I really liked that it began to happen more often. Then, a defining event in my story happened. One Thursday, I skipped work around noon without telling Laura, who was at her usual place of work. I had planned to play 9 holes of golf, but the rain negated those expectations. However, I was planning our upcoming anniversary. I wanted to throw Laura a surprise party, so I talked to the event organizer and got down to business. At about 15 o'clock, a courier came to the door with a wooden box with the inscription "Fragile," which he lifted up the 4 front stairs of our house on a cart. The package was addressed to Laura. I signed for it, and with the help of a courier, we placed it in the living room in a stable position, correctly placing it this side up. It seemed to me that the delivery of the box was strange. I couldn't imagine what was in it. I looked at the return address and it said, Romano Photo Studio, followed by an address in Chicago, which I knew was downtown. I called Laura at work and told her about the arrival of the box. At first she was silent, and then she said, "Oh, it's related to work. They should have sent it to my office. I think they were wrong. Just leave it unopened and I'll have someone help me take it to the office tomorrow." This would normally be a rational explanation, except for 3 things. First, there was complete silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds after I first told her about the box, long enough for me to almost ask, "Are you still there?" Because Laura is never lost for words. Second, the way she told me not to open it, it was more of an order than a request, and there was clearly tension in her voice when she said it. After working for several years in the anti-terrorist service, thanks to osmosis, I realized the importance of stress and nuances. The third, her whole behavior, not just the command not to open the drawer, was tense. My curiosity was aroused so much that I took some photos of the box and entered the return address information into my laptop. The fourth thing that made me worried happened as soon as Laura returned from work. After only a casual greeting, she ran over to the drawer, examined it. Obviously, she was checking to see if I had ruined it, and then was very vague and aloof when I asked her what was in it. I'm not sure exactly, but I was expecting to see some works from an organization in Chicago that wanted to organize an exhibition at my school. I'll open it and look at it at work. "Do you want me to help and open it now?" I asked, not only to be a good guy, but also to test her reaction. "Oh, no. Us. We need to, look at it at work to make sure that there was no damage in case insurance compensation is required." Stammered the usually perky Laura. The next morning, before I left for work, 2 guys from the college where she worked showed up and carefully moved the box into the school van under Laura's careful supervision. When I said, "I can't wait to see the exhibition at school. When will you have everything ready?" It wasn't because I was really interested in seeing the exhibition. It was to test Laura's reaction. Without making eye contact, she replied, I'm not sure if that's exactly the case, but, of course I will. We will. I'll let you know, if we decide about the exhibition." 2 stutters in less than 14 hours on the same topic from the usually fluent Laura. If it hadn't aroused my interest, then nothing would have. The 5th thing that pissed me off and aroused my suspicions was that Laura never said anything about the mysterious box again. In the 2 weeks after the mysterious package arrived, I learned most of what was publicly available about Romano Photo Studios. It was the business in the USA of the world-famous photographer Piero Romano, a man whom I probably once heard of, but surprisingly, a man whom I am sure Laura never mentioned, despite the fact that it was part of her hobby of photography and her work at the university. She often talked about artists and photographers. Piero had a very distinctive style. Most of his photographs were distinguished by both true photographic realism in some parts and effects in other parts. He was considered a master of the traditional photographic effects of bokeh, blur, panning, rule of thirds, and long exposure, often combining several effects in one photo. He was also the only practitioner of a unique effect named after him, Romano's artistic ability, which, as I understand it, translates loosely as Romano's artistry, but I have never seen it written in English, which no one else has been able to reproduce and which is difficult to describe in English. My best attempt would be to say that this makes some objects super realistic, while the neighboring ones are fuzzy and with a change in color, if the photo is colored, or shade inside the same object, but this description does not correspond to reality. Although most of the information about Piero was interesting from an intellectual and artistic point of view, I was struck by two facts. The person in charge of the administration in his studio was his niece, Gina Romano Bianchi. I knew Laura's friend, whom I met only once and never in Chicago. Her married name is Gina Bianchi. He died in a car accident on September 1st last year, and his memorial service in Chicago, before his body was sent to the burial place of his ancestors in Italy, took place on September 6th. What a coincidence that around September 2nd, Laura burst into tears, presumably because she became lonely, and that Laura and the girls were on their shopping trip to Chicago from September 5th to 8th. Although I'm not a rocket scientist, I'm smart enough to get a master's degree in chemistry from one of the top 10 schools in the country, so I was able to figure it out. Despite how devastating it was for me, the only logical explanation was that Laura had had a real love affair with Piero Romano for at least 10 years, and that my daughters knew all about it. Another interesting fact is that on April 16th, 3 weeks after I learned this information, an exhibition of Piero's most famous and inspiring works, including those owned by private collectors and some of which had never been on public display before, was to be held in Chicago. I was sure that around this time Laura would have a business trip to Chicago, despite the fact that it was my birthday on the 18th, and most likely, the exhibition would feature photographs that were in a box delivered to our house 2 weeks earlier. I've never been so motivated in my life, coming up with a plan to deal with my wife and traitorous daughters. Because of my initial anger, which I would have to suppress in order to accomplish what I wanted, I had to arrange a business trip on the night of the day I learned the compromising information, and 2 nights later. I apologized profusely to Laura in a message I left on her work phone after I collected everything I needed from our house for a 3-day stay at a local hotel, promising to make amends. The first part of my plan was to prepare all the necessary divorce papers for filing as soon as I had the evidence I expected. The second part was to find a way to persuade someone to visit the Chicago exhibition and film it on video on the first day of its opening, the 16th, which was by invitation only. The third part was to do everything possible to get out of the divorce with as much wealth and money as possible. I no longer cared about my relationship with Laura and was very close to feeling the same way about Grace and Angela. The fourth part was the final revenge, including after the divorce was final. There were no problems with the first part. I got a recommendation from a good divorce lawyer, Gail Schiff. She advised me on everything I needed to do, and despite the fact that she recommended that the basis be irreconcilable differences, she was willing to accept long-standing adultery. Gail just needed some proof before she could file the paperwork, which I expected she would have on the morning of the 17th, and she could arrange for Laura to be serviced by a law enforcement agent other than the county sheriff and using a private processing server to record events on the last evening exhibitions on the 18th. For the second part, I gathered as much information as possible about the appraisers of works of art that have anything to do with Chicago. I found a young appraiser named Roberto Milan who was trying to build his business. I actually went to see him in Chicago and talked to him for almost the whole day. Roberto was generally familiar with Piero's work and was confident that he would be able to receive an invitation to the opening on the 16th. He didn't mind shooting what I thought might interest me using the small, expensive, easily concealed HD camera I gave him, and he thought he could give a good and high rating for what the photos were worth, which I expected. There will be. Some really experienced appraiser might be able to refute my analysis, but I would be happy to accept the challenge, as it would help me establish myself as a real player in the world of art appreciation, were the last words that made me hire Roberto. For the segment of parts 3 and 4, I cashed 2 bearer bonds that have been kept in our safe deposit box for at least 12 years. I couldn't remember if Laura had ever really known about them, and she certainly wouldn't remember them now. Now they were worth about $25,000 together. For another piece of Part 3, I provided my lawyer with a complete list of all our assets, including the valuation of our house. I photographed all of Laura's jewelry and the entire contents of our safe deposit box, minus bearer bonds, of course, and provided my lawyer with updated bank statements, credit card numbers and unpaid purchases, retirement and brokerage accounts. As a small snippet of Part 4, on the last day when I was supposedly out of town, I snuck into the house while Laura was at work and used a magic marker to erase my face from every photo in the dozen or so albums that Laura had made over the years. Having never looked at them in their entirety before, I was surprised by the low percentage of photos I was in, no more than 15%. I also found 2 photos that I had never seen before, and even if I had, I probably would have considered them innocent. They were Laura, Gina, Grace, Angela, and drumroll Pierrot. I scanned and photocopied these photos in high quality before returning them to the album, crossing them out with a black marker, pointing the arrow at Pierrot and signing the love of Laura's life. Laura told me 2 days after I returned from my business trip that she had to go to Chicago from the morning of the 15th to noon on the 19th. When I expressed disappointment that she would not be with me at my birthday party and offered to accompany her, she calmly, obviously she was counting on my reaction, objected, saying that it was on business, but that she would take me to the resort next weekend and make amends in a way I've never experienced before. She accompanied this statement with a passionate kiss. As for all parts 1, 3, and 4, this was a particularly risky part of my plan. The rest, especially after I got used to the art appraiser and hired him, I was pretty sure it would fall into place. The risky part was talking to Grace. I decided that I needed to meet Grace face to face, so as soon as I dropped Laura off at the airport on the morning of the 15th, I drove about 250 kilometers from Columbus to Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, where Grace studied chemical engineering. Why Grace and not Angela? Although both girls were much more with their mother than with me, Grace was much more like me, at least as far as her brain function was concerned, than Angela. Neither Angela nor Laura could ever imagine a course of study in chemical engineering, of course, very close to my degrees in chemistry. Besides, Grace found it harder to lie than Angela or Laura, and although her refusal to tell me about Laura's affair with Pierrot indicated otherwise, or maybe not, she was more concerned about family than Angela. I called Grace on her cell phone when I was about halfway there. She really seemed excited about the meeting. I told her that I would invite her to a late lunch at a real restaurant. We met at the restaurant of her choice about a kilometer from the campus and took a secluded table. After we had eaten, I said, "I need to talk to you about something very serious, Grace." A puzzled expression appeared on her face. "Are you okay, Dad?" Physically, yes, but emotionally, despite the obvious lack of external manifestations, I am a wreck. However, before I talk to you, I want you to promise that you won't tell anyone about this, including your mom and Angela, until the day after my birthday. "Promise?" I said, raising my hand in the swear position after I asked, "Do you promise?" "Wow, that sounds serious," she swallowed. "Okay, Dad, I promise, I swear," she said, raising her hand and trying to force a smile. "I found out about your mother's affair with Piero Romano, and I'm trying to decide whether to divorce her," I blurted out. "Oh no, Daddy," she exclaimed, pressing her hand to her mouth, and tears instantly appeared in her eyes. "There is only one hope. I need to find out everything you know about this, and I need you to do a DNA test." "What?" she exclaimed before she was on the verge of a complete breakdown. I realized that the restaurant is not the right place for this. I told her to meet me outside, and after I paid the bill, we'd go to my car. I found the waitress, paid in cash, leaving a $1.20 tip, and found Grace, still in tears, on the sidewalk. As soon as we got into my car, I said, "Okay, Grace, spit it out. The continued existence of our family depends on it." After a few minutes of sobbing, during which she couldn't get anything out of herself, and I just looked at her, she started talking. "I didn't realize that Mom was sleeping with Pierrot, or Uncle Pierrot as we were told to call him, until I was 12, despite showing affection every time we were in Chicago, especially at Christmas. I know this from the comments Angela made that she knew before, but I wasn't sophisticated enough to figure it out. I talked to my mom. She said it was grown up, that she was in love with 2 men and that I'll understand when I grow up, that you should never find out, because it could mean the end of our family, because you were too insensitive. I think that's the word she used to describe you. That's why I swore to keep a secret." Grace was silent again for a moment and then continued. "I was hoping that everything would end at Pierrot's funeral and that you would never know. After she made a fool of herself at his coffin, I came face to face with her again. I told her that if she had just jumped into someone else's arms, I would have told you the whole story, that she loved Pierrot and loved you, and there won't be anyone else. She just had to honor Pierrot's memory. I believed her and prayed that this day when you find out would never come, because I'm sure she wouldn't have another love or even an affair. I pressed her for more information until I decided it would be counterproductive to get more. She was, as I had hoped, still in a state of mental anguish when I surprised her with the second reason for my visit. I hope to establish a relationship with your mother, Grace, and what you've told me will help. However, I need something else. I need us to submit DNA samples to make sure that you are my biological daughter. No, Daddy, no, she cried. You're my only father. I know I'm your father, I replied, but I need to know if I'm your biological father too. Let me wet your cheek. I'll get mine wet and we'll put them in this envelope, I said, taking a large envelope from the back seat, and we'll send it to the testing lab together. She protested a little more, but finally agreed. I patted her cheek. Then I blotted mine. I pretended to drop a sealed tampon on the floor of the car, and then took another one from under the seat in its place. She never noticed. I showed her a letter in an envelope addressed to the laboratory. She saw 2 smear containers in the envelope, and that's when I sealed it. The instructions in the letter were to send the results both directly to Grace and to me. When I drove her back to campus, she watched me drop an envelope into the express mail mailbox on the way. When we hugged goodbye, she begged, "Promise that you will forgive Mom and you will succeed." I can't promise now because I don't lie the way she does. However, you did your part to increase the chances that it would work. Now remember, don't tell anyone about our conversation until the 19th at the earliest. I promised, she smiled. Then she faltered. There is, one more thing. I have to tell you. Mom and Angela will be at the Chicago exhibition of Pierrot's works, some of which are photographs of Mom on your birthday. She told me that she was sorry that everything had turned out this way, but she had to attend, because the works that she inherited from Pierrot in his will would be on display. She wanted me to come too, but I had too much work to do at school. I smiled and answered as nonchalantly as I could. I know, thank you for your honesty. We hugged again and she left. She didn't see the tears I shed, knowing that my relationship with Angela was now as dead as it was with Laura, but not yet deciding if I could save her and Grace. Grace didn't know that I had recorded our conversation in the car. There was one thing Grace didn't know about, which would have hurt her, and was part of the 4th part of my plan. The tampon I put in an envelope, presumably belonging to me, belonged to an Italian-born cleaner who worked in my office building, with whom I had been friends for many years. I promised to pay for the identification of his pedigree as a birthday present to him. He didn't even ask why I needed 3 strokes instead of 1. The one I sent to test his heritage showed that he was more than 80% Italian, with a slight sprinkling of Eastern and Western European blood, which made him happy. Why did I put the Italian's DNA in what was supposed to be tested instead of my own? Because I wanted everyone to be hurt. The reason I used an Italian is because during the DNA analysis they can, even when comparing 2 sets, find out the origin of both authors. And since Pierrot was Italian, I wanted everyone to conclude that he was the father of Grace, and if I can figure it out, Angela. I crossed my fingers so Grace wouldn't tell me. I talked to her on the phone on the 16th and 18th, and she promised that she hadn't told me. And since I hadn't heard anything from Laura, I was sure it was true. Around 11 p.m. on the 16th, Roberto Milan emailed me photos of the relevant parts of the Romano exhibition. They hit me deeper than I thought. I was shaking like a leaf and sobbing as I looked through them. It was a collage or a series of 10 photographs, increasing in size from the first to the last. All of them possessed the distinctive features of Romano, including the last 2 stunning effects of Romano's artistry. The series was called Natale Amore, Christmas Love. What initially broke my heart was the first 2 episodes, which featured 2 girls in the background of a photograph of a woman who was undoubtedly Laura. While the girls' faces were sideways, blurred. Now from their hairstyles, what they were wearing, Christmas gifts from my mom, and relative sizes, it was safe to say that they were Angela and Grace when they were about 9 and 11. The second episode started again with a photo of the girls in the background. After I threw up, drank some ginger ale, and cried a lot, I looked at the photos again. If they weren't tearing my heart out, I would have to say that the last 2 photos were probably the best of their kind I've ever seen. I read the text accompanying Roberto Milan's report. I'm sorry, I know it's going to be hard for you, The collection is worth at least $300,000, most likely $500,000. The penultimate photo alone would have fetched $125,000, $175,000 if sold separately. The last two photos are the best performance of the effects of Romano's artistry in history, not only in my opinion, but also in the opinion of at least 4 other appraisers and art historians whose conversations I overheard. I asked Gina if there was anything for sale. She put me in touch with the owner of Pierrot's will, which is not surprising, Laura. Laura said they are not currently for sale because they are priceless, and that the 4 photos of her completely naked will not be sold before her death. I wouldn't want the general public and especially my husband to see me like this while I'm alive, she said. Especially my husband, with a laugh. Even though he was doing his job, he might as well have ripped my balls off. I have it on tape, were the last words of his email, accompanied by a frowning smiley face. I emailed a digital form of my recording of what Grace said, as well as photographs and Roberto's words to my attorney, Gail Schiff. She called me at 7:30 a.m. on the 17th. Obviously, your petition for divorce is justified by the allegation of adultery. A law enforcement officer will be serving Laura at a gala reception tomorrow evening. I need to add something, I said. I will send this so that you can send it to your processing server along with the divorce papers. I handed Gail an envelope addressed to Angela. The envelope contained a letter from me, a swab from the cheek of an Italian cleaner, a container with a new tampon, and an envelope sent by express mail addressed to the DNA laboratory with instructions attached. The letter from me to Angela said, Angela, if there's any hope that you and I will have a relationship in the future, there's one thing you have to do for me. You need to take a swab from the inside of your cheek, put it in an envelope addressed to the DNA lab, which already contains my swab, and send the envelope by express mail. As you can see, the lab has instructions to send the results directly to you at school, as well as to me. Maybe you don't want a relationship with me in the future. However, you still need to do as I ask, because if you don't, I'll make sure my money is tied to it, and you can say goodbye to tuition, room and board, as well as expenses for the end of your first and final years at that expensive private college that you attend. So even if you hate me as much as your actions and inaction towards me in the past would suggest, it's in your best interest to do what I'm asking. Grace has already fulfilled the request. Your father, Grant Oster. I was glad I wasn't there when the scandal broke out in Chicago on my birthday. The process server informed Gail that Laura and Angela were smiling broadly while chatting with the public around 9 p.m. on the 18th. They were puzzled when a law enforcement officer handed them envelopes, as the processing server that was with him was taking photos. They opened the envelopes on the spot. The law enforcement officer left, but the processing server stayed, taking more photos until he was kicked out. In the photos he emailed Gail and Gail sent me, Laura was seen sinking lower and lower to the ground, eventually landing in the fetal position, and Angela was first distraught, then angry. She was trying to take care of her prostrate mother. They really ruined the holiday, was the last cryptic comment from the processing server in an email accompanying the photos, with a smiling emoji attached. Angela called me on the morning of the 19th, expressing her disgust at the way I submitted it to the newspapers, to which I replied, "A tough traitor, tell it to someone who cares. I've never spoken to her in such words in my life." She said, "I'm not inclined to do this DNA thing." "Don't you want to find out who your biological father is, and not the idiot who supported you all these years?" I asked sarcastically. "You are my father," she replied. "Maybe, maybe not," I replied. "However, one thing is for sure. I've already asked my lawyer to freeze all your mother's accounts and mine. I can assure you that in the future there will be no money for your education, or even for living expenses, since you are 20 years old, if you do not mail this envelope with your tampon. Now that I think about it, I'm going to need a video of you swabbing your cheek, putting it in an envelope and mailing it, all at the same time to believe you, given the lies you've told me over the years." "It's cruel. I didn't lie to you," she growled. "Oh, really?" I chuckled. "But you didn't say the whole truth, did you?" "Your sister is remorseful and will get her tuition paid. Obviously, you're just as nasty as your mother, so I'm not going to waste time discussing this with you, because you make me sick. Either do as I say and send me the video by email, or this is our last conversation in your life." With that, I slammed down the phone. It's nice to have a landline phone where you can make a statement by hanging up, rather than just pressing that red button which had no accent on a mobile phone. The vile mother did not try to call me on the 18-21 st, and probably postponed her return to Columbus for 2 days, sympathizing with her bosom friend Gina. The excitement at the exhibition on the 18th was noted not only in 2 major Chicago newspapers, but also in 2 national art publications. A photo of Laura lying down appeared in each of them, apparently sold to them by the process server. I laughed heartily in between the urge to empty my stomach. Obviously, the nasty girl actually came to the house, which, as far as I could tell, was no longer a house on the 22nd. I only know because the envelope I left on the new front door steel, with a reinforced frame and a replaced lock, just like on the side and rear doors, was no longer there, and my lawyer left a message on my mobile phone that we needed to talk. The envelope was addressed to a nasty girl, and I assumed that Laura must have known it was her. My internal message was brief. Hey, have your lawyer contact mine to find out when you can pick up your personal belongings. The sooner we sell the house and end our sham marriage, the better. I will fight every attempt you make to return to this house until it is sold. Do something decent for the first time in our farcical relationship. Don't resist it. Not that you would resist for any other reasons than economic ones, since you have neither love nor respect for me. Your former ignoramus Grant. P.S. The doors are locked. Any unauthorized entry will result in the destruction of all your previous family albums. The lawyers had to appear in court to decide something about the living conditions. I probably could have gotten exactly what I wanted if I hadn't written it P.S. in a note, but I couldn't help myself. In the end, through our lawyers, we agreed to vacate the house and put it up for sale immediately. At the same time, the amount of our expenses for temporary housing will be taken into account when dividing the property. Laura tried to be difficult in negotiating money, but she didn't have the opportunity to negotiate because she bought her precious photos from Pierrot when we were still married. When I demanded 5 photos, she could choose 1, then me, etc., until all 10 were separated. According to her lawyer, she became hysterical, especially since by that time she saw me retouching family photo albums. At Laura's insistence, we evaluated Romano's photographs, one of which was taken by an appraiser hired by her, and the other by a neutral appraiser. Funnily enough, Romano's photo was the lowest, and cost her $200,000 more than if she had agreed with his assessment. Since this had a serious impact on what she would get in the end, she offered me 2 photos, the one she had chosen herself. However, she canceled this offer when I asked my lawyer to tell her that I agreed on the condition that she would take them to the local landfill and observe what I would do with them. When all was said and done, by the time the divorce process was completed, Laura had her personal belongings, including all albums. She was angry that I didn't need any of them, half of the furniture and a quarter of the sale price of the house. Nothing else, including no alimony, but a suspended prison sentence. More on that later. We did agree to jointly pay all of Grace and Angela's college expenses until they graduate, but no more. As for Angela and Grace, as expected, the results of the DNA analysis showed that they were not my biological daughters. This infuriated Laura so much that she almost had a stroke. I talked about this with Grace, not with Angela, who complied with my request solely to pay for her college expenses and was apparently pleased with the lack of a further relationship with me. Dad, Mom says the results are wrong. She said that while she was married to you, she never had love with anyone except you and Pierrot, and that she hadn't even met Pierrot before I was born. Then why is your father of Italian descent like Pierrot, while I am Dutch on both sides of my family? Your mother has demonstrated that she is a pathological liar. She lied to me about loving me for the entire 24+ years of our relationship. So why should you believe that everything she says is true? She says she wants another DNA test. This is not going to happen because you are not underage children, and this has nothing to do with the divorce. I just wanted to know for myself and for you and Angela to know the truth. Besides, you saw how I blotted my cheek and put a tampon in an envelope, and then sent it myself. Dad, Mom also wants to talk to you in person. She says she made a request through her lawyer several times, but she's not even sure if your lawyer gave you the message, because she never got an answer. She didn't get a response because I told my lawyer to ignore her request. What reason could I have to talk to this fool? Dad, please don't call her that in front of me. I still love her despite her flaws. I'm asking you, please, for a favor. Talk to her for an hour. You are welcome. I'm sorry, Grace. I can't help it. I've forgiven you, and I'd like to keep in touch with you, but there's nothing, and I don't mean anything that would make me talk to her. Now about Laura's suspended prison sentence and receiving only a quarter of the proceeds from the sale of the house. After my phone conversation with Grace about the DNA test and Laura's desire to talk to me, she did something stupid. I thought she might throw something out, so I connected and walked around with an alarm button connected directly to a private security company. One night, a woman knocked on the door of the apartment I rented during the divorce process until the final financial details were worked out. I didn't see the two big guys and Laura standing to the side when I looked through the peephole. As soon as I opened the door, two big guys burst in and grabbed me, but not before I pressed my silent alarm button. As soon as they grabbed me, they yanked me onto a chair and tied me to it, while Laura entered and the other woman left. Grant, I'm sorry I had to do this, but you refused to meet with me and refused to repeat the DNA test, which we both know is wrong. Then she started talking some hilarious nonsense about how she had always loved me, and that she just loved Pierrot into the bargain. That her heart was big enough for both of us. She realized that we had passed the point of reconciliation, but she just wanted to lighten her soul. She was holding a tampon in her hands while talking to me. Obviously, she was going to forcibly take a DNA sample from me. It really annoyed her that I didn't verbally react to anything she said. I refused to even acknowledge her presence, trying my best to avoid eye contact. Fortunately, when she was about to order her two thugs to open my mouth to take a DNA swab, my panic button went off. The security company called the police, and 3 cops with pistols at the ready broke into the house. They found me tied up, and one of the villains had an illegal weapon in his pants pocket. I explained the situation when the cops held the 3 of them at gunpoint. The cops ignored Laura's request to just let them go. They didn't want to hurt me. They arrested 3 of them. A small attack did not please the judge in our divorce proceedings. After she made it clear that if she had to rule, it would be really bad for Laura, I received a division of the estate and other considerations outlined above. The criminal court took pity on Laura because it was her first offense. She received 2 years probation and a $10,000 fine, which was only from her share of the family estate. The 2 guys weren't doing so well because they had dark stories. One got a year in prison before parole was possible, and the one with the illegal weapon got 5 years before parole was possible. The 4th part of my plan did not end when the divorce became final, although I do not admit either here or anywhere else that I had anything to do with it. It's just karma. That's what I always answer when asked about it. 18 months after the final divorce, I was on a Caribbean cruise with a 32-year-old hot little divorcee who loved to be treated properly and richly and loved making love even more. She looked too much like Laura at that age and was too short-tempered for me to seek a permanent relationship with her. While I was making love on a cruise, Laura's apartment was broken into while she was at work. The apartment was trashed. Something was stolen, including the second most provocative and valuable photograph of Laura Romano. She lent the most valuable and provocative one to an art gallery for a long time, so it was not in her apartment. However, more items were destroyed than stolen, including 7 of the 8 remaining Romano photographs in all family photo albums, all but the 2 earliest. Of course, I was a suspect when I returned. Obviously, I couldn't do it myself since I was on a cruise 3,000 kilometers away, but Laura insisted to the cops that I paid someone for it. When the police came up to me, and as soon as they started asking questions indicating that I was a suspect, I refused to talk to them and hired a criminal defense lawyer. After searching through my phone and financial records, which of course did not include 2 cashed bearer bonds that were never part of the estate in the divorce, they could not find any indication that I could pay anyone for it, and there was no connection that they were able to. I would like to find someone who was capable of this, to do what was done. I got the distinct impression that 6 months after their first contact with me, the cops practically gave up, although I'm sure Laura continued to molest them. As soon as the statute of limitations expired, I threw a party. My It's Finally Over party was mostly attended by friends. My parents were no longer alive, but my brother, his wife, my 2 nephews, my new love interest Melody, a widow my age, Melody and Grace's 2 adult children, her husband and my granddaughter were there. I didn't have any relationship with Angela then, and I don't have any now. I was not invited to her wedding and would not have gone even if I had been invited. However, I heard from Grace that Angela's husband caught her cheating, and she is in the early stages of divorce proceedings. Laura gave Grace an ultimatum: either sever all ties with me or with her. To everyone's surprise, including mine, she chose me, probably because she was convinced that Laura, as I imagined her, was a pathological liar. More importantly, Grace realized how terrible it was that her mother had thrown information about her relationship with her lover in her daughter's face and forced them to lie to hide her infidelity. Grace did not want her children to face such an attitude. There's only one thing that's caused friction between Grace and me in the last 5 years. I told her the truth about DNA testing. She was angry at me at first, but she forgave me, just like I forgave her for her duplicity over the years. She was actually very happy that I was her biological father. I had another DNA test to prove it, in addition to the practical one. I really believe Laura moved to Chicago, but I don't know for sure, and more importantly, I don't give a shit. End.